Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars through the massive viewport. The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached beyond their home system. 5 colonies now existed on distant worlds, and Jake felt proud every time he thought about it. His ship was the finest vessel Earth had ever built, equipped with weapons and shields that represented decades of research and development. The Defiance patrolled the outer edge of human space, protecting the trade routes between Earth and the new colonies. Jake was a tall man with short brown hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 15 years, working his way up from a junior officer to commanding the flagship. The crew respected him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. Today should have been a routine patrol, checking on the mining operations near the Kepler station. Nothing exciting ever happened out here in the quiet darkness of space. Lieutenant Megan Porter sat at her tactical station, monitoring the sensor displays. She was young, only 26 years old, but her mind worked faster than anyone Jake had ever met. She could see patterns in data that others missed, finding solutions to problems before most people even understood the question. Her red hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes focused intensely on the screens before her. Suddenly, every alarm on the bridge started screaming at once. Megan's hands flew across her console, trying to make sense of what the sensors were telling her. Jake spun around from the viewport and moved quickly to his command chair. The main screen flickered and then showed something that made his blood run cold. Ships were appearing at the edge of the system, hundreds of them, materializing out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. The vessels were enormous, each one at least 3 times larger than the Defiance. Their hulls were dark purple and covered in strange symbols that glowed with an eerie blue light. Jake had never seen anything like them before. Humanity had searched for alien life for centuries, sending probes and signals into the void, but they had always been alone. Until now. Megan's voice was steady despite the fear Jake could see in her eyes. The sensors counted 327 ships, all of them armed with weapons far more powerful than anything humanity possessed. She ran the calculations 3 times, hoping she had made a mistake, but the numbers did not change. The human fleet had only 12 warships in total, scattered across 5 star systems. The Defiance was alone. A message came through on all frequencies, transmitted in perfect English. The voice was deep and cold, speaking with the authority of someone who had never been questioned. The speaker identified himself as Fleet Commander Zekthar of the Krethian Dominion. His empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, conquering 47 different species and bringing them under Krethian control. Now he had come for humanity. The message was simple and brutal. Humanity would surrender within 72 hours and accept vassalage under the Dominion. They would provide resources, technology, and soldiers to serve the Krethian Empire. In return, humanity would be allowed to exist under Krethian protection and guidance. If humanity refused, the fleet would destroy every human colony and orbital station, then move on to Earth itself. Zekthar gave them 3 days to decide, then the transmission ended. Jake immediately opened a secure channel to Earth and sent everything they had recorded. The transmission would take 6 hours to reach home and another 6 for a response. He ordered the Defiance to maintain position but stay at maximum alert. Every crew member felt the weight of what they had just witnessed. The galaxy was not empty, and the beings who lived among the stars were not friendly. On Earth, Admiral Kate Sullivan received the transmission in the middle of the night. She was a veteran of 30 years in the fleet, a woman who had dedicated her entire life to protecting humanity. Her gray hair and the lines on her face showed her age, but her mind remained sharp and her will unbreakable. She watched the Krethian message 4 times, each viewing making her more angry than afraid. Kate called an emergency meeting at the Pentagon, summoning every military leader, scientist, and government official who could reach the capital within 3 hours. The president gave her full authority to coordinate Earth's response. As people filed into the secure conference room, Kate stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed, her expression hard as stone. The discussion that followed was heated and desperate. Some officials argued for surrender, claiming that resistance against such overwhelming force was suicide. Others wanted to fight, even if it meant dying on their feet rather than living on their knees. Kate listened to every argument, but her decision had already been made. Humanity would not submit to alien masters after fighting so hard to reach the stars. Dr. Eric Hayes was a quantum physicist who had spent 20 years studying the strange ways that human consciousness interacted with advanced computers. He was a thin man with glasses and messy black hair that he never bothered to comb. Next to him sat Dr. Lisa Chen, an artificial intelligence specialist whose work had pushed the boundaries of machine learning and neural interfaces. She was small and quiet, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Eric and Lisa had been working together on a classified project for the past 2 years. They had discovered something remarkable, something that might give humanity a chance. Human brains processed quantum information differently than any computer ever built. When a person linked their consciousness to a quantum processor, the combination created something greater than either part alone. The human mind could guide the computer through problems that would take years to solve, doing it in seconds through pure intuition and creativity. Lisa explained that they had tested the system with volunteers, using them to control defensive satellites and weapons platforms. The results had been incredible, with accuracy rates that exceeded anything artificial intelligence could achieve. But the technology was dangerous and untested in real combat. The neural strain on the human operators was severe, and they did not know what would happen if someone stayed linked for too long. Kate looked at the two scientists and asked the only question that mattered. Could this technology defeat the Krethians? Eric and Lisa exchanged glances, neither wanting to promise something they could not deliver. Finally, Eric spoke honestly. He did not know if it would be enough, but it was the only weapon humanity possessed that the aliens would not expect. The Admiral made her decision. She sent orders to every human warship to return to Earth immediately. They would make their stand at humanity's home, where the orbital platforms and defense stations could support them. She also ordered the construction teams to begin modifying every platform to include the quantum consciousness interfaces. They had 72 hours to prepare for a battle that would decide the fate of their entire species. Back on the Defiance, Jake received his orders and set course for Earth at maximum speed. Megan studied every piece of data they had collected on the Krethian ships, looking for any weakness or pattern they could exploit. She noticed something interesting about their shields. The defensive barriers rotated through different frequencies in a predictable pattern, cycling every 12 seconds without variation. It was efficient and had probably worked perfectly for centuries, but it was also predictable. She made a note of her observation and sent it to Admiral Kate Sullivan with her analysis. If the human ships could time their weapons fire to match the shield rotation, they might be able to punch through the barriers at the exact moment of vulnerability. It was a small advantage, but in a battle against impossible odds, every advantage mattered. The 72 hours began counting down, and humanity prepared for war. The 72 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world. Every human warship returned to Earth orbit, forming a defensive ring around their home planet. The Defiance took position at the center of the formation with Jake Morrison commanding from the bridge. Around them floated 11 other warships, each one crewed by men and women who knew they might not survive the next few hours. Behind the ships were 50 orbital defense platforms, massive structures bristling with weapons and covered in armor plating. But these platforms hid a secret. Inside each one sat groups of volunteers connected to quantum computers through neural interfaces. Dr. Eric Hayes had worked day and night to install the equipment, racing against the deadline. Now 50 human minds waited in silent connection with the machines, ready to guide Earth's defenses with precision no computer alone could achieve. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched from the command center deep beneath the Pentagon. Her screens showed the positions of every human ship and platform. She had done everything possible to prepare for this moment, but she knew it would not be enough. The Krethian fleet outnumbered them by more than 20-1. Every tactical simulation ended the same way, with human defeat in less than 30 minutes. She pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the present. The Krethian fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel exactly when their deadline expired. 327 ships appeared like dark ghosts against the stars, their purple hulls gleaming with that strange blue light. Fleet Commander Zekthar sat in his command throne aboard the flagship and surveyed the human defenses with cold amusement. He had conquered species far more advanced than these primitives. This would be over quickly. Zekthar opened a communication channel and gave humanity one final chance to surrender. Kate Sullivan's face appeared on his screen and he saw no fear in her eyes. She spoke 3 words that sealed Earth's fate. "We will fight." The Krathian commander nodded slowly, almost respectfully, then closed the channel. He gave the order to attack. The Krathian fleet opened fire with weapons that tore through space itself. Beams of purple energy streaked toward the human ships, each one carrying enough power to vaporize a small moon. The human shields flared bright as they absorbed the impact. But the force of the bombardment pushed the ships backward. 2 destroyers on the outer edge of the formation took direct hits, their shields failing in seconds. The vessels exploded in brilliant flashes of light, taking their crews with them. Jake felt the Defiance shudder under the assault. His shields were holding, but losing strength with every hit. He ordered all ships to return fire, and the human fleet unleashed everything they had. Missiles streaked toward the alien vessels, followed by particle beams and plasma torpedoes. The attacks hit the Krathian shields and scattered harmlessly across their surfaces. Then something changed. The orbital platforms opened fire and their accuracy was supernatural. Every shot found its target, striking the Krathian ships at precise moments when their shields cycled to a weaker frequency. Alien vessels began taking damage, their armor cracking under the relentless precision fire. One Krathian cruiser exploded when a lucky shot penetrated deep into its reactor core. Then another fell and another. Inside the platforms, the 50 volunteers felt the quantum processors merge with their thoughts. Dr. Lisa Chen monitored their vital signs from Earth and watched in amazement as they worked together like a single organism. They could feel the positions of every target, predict every movement, and guide the weapons with accuracy that should have been impossible. But the strain on their bodies was immense. Several volunteers had blood trickling from their noses, and their brain activity readings were far beyond safe levels. Zekthar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. He had lost 12 ships in 5 minutes, more casualties than he had suffered in his last 10 campaigns combined. These humans were fighting with a ferocity and skill that defied everything he knew about newly contacted species. He adjusted his tactics, ordering his fleet to spread out and attack from multiple angles. The humans could not defend everywhere at once. The strategy worked. Human ships found themselves surrounded, taking fire from all directions. The platforms continued their deadly accurate shooting, but there were simply too many targets. Another human destroyer died under concentrated fire, its hull splitting apart. The cruiser Valiant took heavy damage, and Captain Ryan Foster ordered non-essential crew to the escape pods. Jake watched his tactical screen and saw their defense collapsing. They had hurt the Krathians badly, destroying more than 30 ships, but it was not enough. The enemy still had almost 300 vessels, and the human fleet was down to 9 ships. He opened a channel to Admiral Sullivan and requested permission to implement Protocol Omega. Kate hesitated. Protocol Omega was the last desperate option, a plan so dangerous they had never intended to use it. The plan would link every ship's quantum computer together through the consciousness of their bridge crews, creating a network that spanned the entire battlefield. The combined processing power would be enormous, but the neural strain might kill everyone connected to it. She looked at the displays showing Earth below, where 8 billion people waited to learn their fate. She thought about every child who would never grow up if the Krathians won, every dream that would die under alien occupation. Kate Sullivan took a deep breath and gave the authorization code. Jake received the confirmation and turned to his crew. He explained what was about to happen and gave each person a choice. They could disconnect now and head to the escape pods, or they could stay and link their minds to the defense network. Every single member of his bridge crew chose to stay. Megan Porter met his eyes and nodded once, ready for whatever came next. The neural interfaces activated across all 9 remaining human warships. Bridge crews felt their consciousness expand beyond their bodies, merging with the quantum computers and then with each other. Suddenly, Jake could feel the other ships as if they were extensions of his own body. He sensed Megan's tactical brilliance flowing through the network, along with the courage of Captain Ryan Foster and the determination of hundreds of other crew members. The effect on the battle was immediate and terrifying. The human ships began moving with perfect coordination, each vessel knowing exactly where the others would be. Their weapons fire synchronized across impossible distances, multiple ships targeting the same weak points on Krathian vessels. They were no longer 9 separate ships fighting alone. They had become a single distributed intelligence with 9 bodies. Zekthar watched in growing horror as his fleet began falling apart. Human ships dodged his attacks before he finished giving the orders, as if they could read his mind. When he tried to outflank them, they were already moving to counter. His ships collided with each other as they maneuvered desperately to avoid the devastatingly accurate human fire. In 10 minutes, he lost another 40 vessels. But aboard the human ships, people were paying a terrible price. The neural strain was burning through their minds like fire. On the Valiant, Captain Ryan Foster watched his tactical officer collapse at her station, unconscious with blood running from her nose and ears. Other crew members were shaking uncontrollably, their bodies unable to handle the massive influx of data flowing through the quantum link. Dr. Lisa Chen saw the medical readouts from Earth and knew they had only minutes before people started dying from brain damage. She sent an emergency command to shut down the neural network, but Jake Morrison intercepted the signal and countermanded it. They were winning for the first time since the battle began, and if they disconnected now, everything they had sacrificed would be for nothing. Earth would fall. The human fleet pressed their advantage, hunting down Krethian ships with merciless efficiency. They had destroyed over 90 enemy vessels when something unexpected happened. The Krethian fleet suddenly began receiving orders to withdraw. But these orders were not coming from Zekthar. He was shouting at his communications officer, demanding to know who was overriding his commands. The answer came in a transmission broadcast across all frequencies. A new voice spoke, calm and authoritative, addressing both the Krethians and the humans. This was Arbiter Cone of the Galactic Assembly, and he was ordering an immediate ceasefire. The battle was over. Jake Morrison felt the neural link disconnect all at once, and the sudden isolation made him gasp like a drowning man breaking the surface of water. His consciousness snapped back into his own body, and for a moment he could not remember where he ended and the ship began. Around him on the bridge, crew members slumped in their chairs or fell to their knees. Megan Porter was shaking violently, her hands pressed against her temples as if trying to hold her skull together. The main screen showed the Krethian fleet pulling back to a safe distance, their weapons powering down in response to the ceasefire order. Jake wanted to feel relief, but his mind was still processing what had just happened. They had been connected, all of them together, thinking and fighting as one. Now that connection was gone, and he felt hollow and incomplete. Dr. Lisa Chen's voice came through the communications system, urgent and concerned. She ordered all bridge crews to report to medical immediately for neurological scans. Jake tried to stand and found his legs would not support him. 2 security officers had to help him to the medical bay while Megan walked beside them, still trembling but refusing assistance. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched from Earth as new ships began arriving in the system. These vessels were different from the Krethians, coming in dozens of strange shapes and sizes. Some looked like living creatures made of metal. Others were geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, and a few seemed to be made of pure light held in force field containers. Each ship broadcast identification codes that translated into names humanity had never heard before. The largest vessel positioned itself between the human fleet and the Krethians. It was a massive station rather than a ship, appearing from faster-than-light travel like a small moon made of silver and crystal. The structure rotated slowly, and its surface was covered in observation decks and docking ports. This was the mobile assembly court, a neutral ground where the galaxy's disputes were settled. A transmission came through on all channels, and this time humans saw the face of the speaker. Arbiter Cone was not what anyone expected. He looked almost human, with pale blue skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. His voice was calm and patient, the tone of someone who had mediated thousands of conflicts over a very long life. He explained that the galaxy was not the empty frontier humanity had imagined. 40 species belonged to the Galactic Assembly, a coalition formed 6,000 years ago to prevent endless wars between starfaring civilizations. The Assembly had laws and rules, territories and trade agreements, and a complex balance of power that kept relative peace. The Krethian Dominion was a member of the Assembly, but they had been conducting their conquest of humanity in secret. They had hoped to present Earth as an already conquered territory, something the Assembly would accept after the fact. But other species had been monitoring the situation, and when the battle began, they reported it to the Assembly Court. What the Crethians had done was not technically illegal since humanity was not part of the galactic community, but it violated the spirit of assembly principles. Kate Sullivan listened to this explanation with growing anger. The galaxy had been watching them, had known about the Crethian threat, and had done nothing until humans were already dying. Arbiter Cone seemed to sense her fury even across the vast distance. He acknowledged that the assembly had failed humanity by not making contact sooner, but he offered compensation in the form of immediate membership talks and diplomatic protection. A delegation would come to Earth within the week to begin negotiations. In the meantime, the Crethian fleet was forbidden from approaching human space, and the assembly court would remain in the system to enforce this order. Zekthar protested loudly, claiming that humanity had destroyed nearly 100 of his ships and killed thousands of Crethian soldiers. He demanded compensation and justice, but other voices in the transmission pushed back against him. A being of pure energy named Counselor Mirasol spoke with a voice like singing crystal. Her species, the Photonic Collective, had been studying the battle data, and what they saw amazed them. Humanity had demonstrated an ability no other known species possessed. They had merged their consciousness with quantum computers in a way that should have been impossible. Dr. Eric Hayes was brought into the discussion, still exhausted from monitoring the neural links but coherent enough to explain the science. He described how human brains processed quantum information differently than any artificial intelligence. The connection between human intuition and quantum processing created something greater than either part alone. It was not magic or advanced technology, just a quirk of human neurology that happened to be incredibly useful. The reaction from the galactic community was immediate and loud. Species that had spent millennia trying to create true artificial consciousness suddenly realized that humans had been born with the key. Dr. Lisa Chen found herself fielding questions from alien scientists who wanted to know everything about human neural structure and cognitive development. But not everyone was impressed. Ambassador Vectal of the Ithrian Republic, a tall reptilian being with silver scales, pointed out that humanity was still primitive by galactic standards. They had faster-than-light travel and basic energy weapons, but their technology was at least 500 years behind the assembly average. One useful ability did not make them equals. Jake Morrison was released from medical after 6 hours of tests. The doctors told him that his brain activity had permanently changed. The neural pathways formed during the quantum link would never fully disappear. He would always feel a faint connection to quantum systems, a low humming in the back of his mind whenever he was near them. 40% of those who had used the neural interface showed similar changes. They were calling these people the linked. Megan Porter was one of them. She sat in the observation deck of the Defiance and stared at Earth below, feeling the orbital platforms humming in her awareness, even though she was no longer connected to them. It was strange and unsettling, like having an extra sense she had never asked for, but she also felt more alive than ever before, as if the universe had opened up and shown her something precious. The week passed in a blur of medical treatments and damage assessments. The human fleet had lost 3 destroyers and suffered heavy damage to 4 other ships. Nearly 2,000 crew members had died and hundreds more were injured, but they had survived, and that was what mattered. Earth remained free. When the diplomatic delegation arrived, Admiral Kate Sullivan led the human representatives aboard a transport ship that docked with the mobile assembly court. She brought Jake Morrison as military advisor, Dr. Eric Hayes and Dr. Lisa Chen as scientific experts, and surprisingly Megan Porter as tactical specialist. The young lieutenant had become famous across multiple star systems for her analysis of Crethian shield frequencies. The interior of the assembly court was overwhelming. Hundreds of different species moved through massive corridors, breathing different atmospheres and communicating in thousands of languages. Translation devices made conversation possible, but the sheer diversity of life forms made humans feel very small and very young. They were escorted to a conference chamber where representatives from dozens of species waited. The room was enormous, with sections adjusted for different environmental needs. Some delegates sat in tanks of liquid, others floated in zero-gravity fields, and a few existed as patterns of light projected from crystals. Arbiter Cone welcomed the human delegation and invited them to present their case. Kate Sullivan stood before the assembly and spoke clearly about what humanity wanted. They had not asked for this war, had not sought conflict with anyone. All they wanted was to live freely, to explore the stars and to choose their own destiny. They were willing to join the galactic community, to learn from older species and share what they knew, but they would never accept subjugation. Dr. Lisa Chen activated a holographic display and showed the quantum consciousness technology in detail. She explained how the interface worked, what it could do, and what it cost the humans who used it. The alien scientists watched with fascination, asking technical questions that Lisa answered honestly. She made no attempt to hide anything, understanding that transparency was essential for building trust. Counselor Mirasol spoke again, her voice filled with excitement. She proposed an immediate research partnership with humanity, offering to share photonic technology in exchange for access to neural interface research. Other species began making similar offers, seeing opportunities for advancement through cooperation with these strange newcomers. But Zekthar and the Krethian delegation were furious. They stood and declared that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted. The Krethians had lost 97 ships and over 30,000 soldiers. Humanity had proven themselves to be violent and unpredictable, using weapons that bypassed all conventional defenses. If the Assembly granted them membership, it would destabilize the entire galactic order. Jake Morrison listened to the Krethian arguments and felt his anger rising. He stood without permission, interrupting the formal proceedings. Security moved to restrain him, but Arbiter Cone raised a hand to stop them. The human commander was allowed to speak. Jake looked directly at Zekthar and spoke in a voice that carried across the chamber. The Krethians had come to Earth uninvited, had threatened genocide, and had fired the first shots. Humanity had simply defended itself with whatever tools they possessed. If the Krethians found human defenses too effective, perhaps they should reconsider their habit of attacking peaceful species. The galaxy had 40 member species, but how many had the Krethians conquered before those 40 said enough was enough? The chamber fell silent. Jake Morrison's words hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. Zekthar's face darkened with rage, and he moved toward the human delegation with clear hostile intent. But before he could take 3 steps, Ambassador Vektal of the Ithrian Republic stepped between them. The tall reptilian being spoke in a calm voice that carried absolute authority. Violence in the Assembly Court was forbidden under the oldest laws of galactic civilization, and any who broke this rule would be expelled immediately. The Krethian commander stopped but did not back down. He pointed at Jake and demanded that the Assembly recognize the threat humanity posed. These primitives had killed thousands of his people using technology that violated the natural order. They had merged their minds with machines, becoming something unnatural and dangerous. If the Assembly allowed this, what would stop other species from attempting the same thing? But Counselor Mirasol responded with logic that cut through Zekthar's emotional arguments. The Photonic Collective had analyzed every second of the battle, and humans had used no illegal weapons or forbidden technologies. They had simply found a way to use quantum computers more effectively than anyone else. The fact that Krethian shields could not adapt to this approach was a failing of Krethian design, not a crime committed by humanity. Other delegates began speaking up, and the tide of opinion shifted against the Krethians. A delegate from the Viridian Union, a species that had been conquered by the Krethians 300 years ago, spoke about how her people had been forced to serve an empire they never chose. She looked at the human delegation with something like hope in her large golden eyes. If humanity could resist the Dominion, perhaps others could find the courage to do the same. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched these discussions and realized something important. The Galactic Assembly was not a unified government, but a collection of different powers, held together by mutual agreement and fear of stronger neighbors. The Krethian Dominion was one of the major military powers, and many smaller species lived under their shadow. Humanity's victory had shown that the Dominion could be defeated, and that revelation was shaking the foundations of galactic politics. Arbiter Cone called for order and proposed a formal vote. The Assembly would decide whether to offer humanity immediate membership or require them to go through the standard probationary period of 50 years. During this time, the court would also investigate Krethian conduct and determine if sanctions were appropriate. Zekthar exploded with anger at this suggestion. He declared that the Krethian Dominion would never accept humans as equals, and if the Assembly granted them membership, his empire would withdraw from the coalition entirely. More than that, he promised that the full Krethian Imperial fleet would return to finish what they had started. He had brought only a small expeditionary force of 300 ships, but the Dominion possessed over 2,000 warships. He would come back with everything, and neither the Assembly nor humanity would be able to stop him. The threat sent ripples of concern through the chamber. Despite their moral objections, many species depended on Krithian military power to maintain stability in their regions of space. If the Dominion withdrew from the Assembly and went to war, it could tear apart the fragile peace that had lasted for centuries. Jake Morrison stood again and spoke with absolute confidence. He thanked Zekthar for the warning and informed him that humanity had spent the past week studying Krithian technology from the wreckage of destroyed ships. Human scientists now understood how their weapons worked, how their shields operated, and how their faster-than-light drives functioned. The Krithians might have 2,000 ships, but humanity was no longer afraid because they knew the enemy was not invincible. Dr. Eric Hayes supported Jake's statement with technical details. Human engineers had already begun designing countermeasures specifically for Krithian systems. Within 6 months, Earth's defense network would be upgraded with weapons calibrated to exploit every weakness in Krithian design. Within a year, humanity would be producing their own warships that combined human neural interface technology with improved versions of alien systems. They were learning faster than any species the galaxy had seen before. Megan Porter stepped forward and added her tactical analysis. She had studied Krithian battle doctrine extensively during the week of preparation. Their strategies relied on overwhelming force and intimidation, but they were predictable and slow to adapt. In a second battle, humanity would be ready for their tactics. The Krithians might win through sheer numbers, but the cost would be devastating for both sides. Was Zekthar willing to sacrifice half his fleet just to prove a point? The Krithian commander had no answer to these statements. He looked around the chamber and saw that many delegates were nodding in agreement with the human analysis. His threats had lost their power because humans refused to be intimidated. Finally, he turned and walked out of the chamber with his delegation following behind. As they left, he promised that this was not over, and that the Dominion would remember this insult. After the Krithians departed, the atmosphere in the chamber changed dramatically. Ambassador Vectal approached the human delegation and spoke privately with Admiral Kate Sullivan. He explained that the Ithrian Republic had long been uncomfortable with Krithian aggression, but lacked the military strength to challenge them openly. If humanity was serious about standing against the Dominion, they would not stand alone. The Ithrians would support them. Other species began making similar approaches. The Viridian Union offered to share information about Krithian occupation tactics and military installations. A species called the Dravani Confederation, which had been threatened by the Krithians for decades, proposed a mutual defense treaty. Even some smaller species that had previously supported the Dominion began questioning their allegiances. Councillor Mirasol presented a formal proposal that surprised everyone. Instead of offering humanity standard membership, she suggested creating something new. The Terran Alliance would be a defensive pact between humanity and any species willing to adopt or cooperate with quantum consciousness technology. This alliance would exist within the broader assembly structure, but would operate independently, creating a counterbalance to the old imperial powers. The proposal was radical and controversial. Some delegates argued that it would divide the assembly into competing factions. Others worried that it would provoke the Krithians into open war. But Ambassador Vectal pointed out that the divisions already existed. The only question was whether smaller species would continue living under the shadow of empires or band together to protect themselves. Kate Sullivan requested time to consult with her government before accepting such a significant proposal. Arbiter Cohn granted a recess of 48 hours, and the human delegation returned to their transport ship. Once in private, they contacted Earth and presented everything that had happened. The president and his advisors debated for hours. Joining the Terran Alliance would mean committing humanity to defend other species against Krithian aggression. It could lead to decades of conflict and would require massive military expansion. But refusing the offer would leave humanity isolated, and the Krithians would eventually return in greater numbers. Dr. Lisa Chen provided additional perspective. She had been approached by scientists from 6 different species who wanted to study quantum consciousness technology. If humanity shared this knowledge carefully and built research partnerships, they could accelerate their technological development by centuries. The alliance was not just about military protection but about gaining access to thousands of years of accumulated galactic knowledge. Jake Morrison sat with Megan Porter in the observation deck while the politicians made their decisions. He asked her what she thought about all of this, whether she believed humanity was ready for such responsibility. Megan was quiet for a long time before answering. She said that humanity had never been ready for anything important in their history. They had not been ready to leave the oceans and walk on land, not ready to build civilizations, not ready to split the atom or leave Earth. But they had done all those things anyway because waiting for readiness meant never moving forward. The decision came back from Earth after 20 hours of debate. Humanity would accept the Alliance proposal with certain conditions. They would share quantum consciousness technology only with species that signed the Mutual Defense Pact, and all research would be conducted jointly to prevent any single species from gaining too much advantage. They would also require that the Alliance have clear democratic principles, with all member species having equal votes regardless of their size or military power. When the Assembly reconvened, Kate Sullivan presented these conditions to the delegates. Ambassador Vectal agreed immediately on behalf of the Ithrian Republic. The Viridian Union signed next, followed by the Dravani Confederation. By the end of the session, 6 species had committed to joining the Terran Alliance, with 3 more expressing strong interest pending approval from their home governments. Councillor Mirasol called it the most significant development in galactic politics since the Assembly's founding. She predicted that within 10 years, the Alliance would rival the old empires in influence and power. Other delegates were less optimistic, warning that the Crethians would never accept this new order peacefully. But the decision was made, and there was no turning back. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy not as conquered subjects or minor members, but as founders of a new coalition that would challenge the established powers. The implications would echo across the stars for generations to come. 5 years passed after the Battle of Terra, and the galaxy looked very different from what it had been. The Terran Alliance now included 12 member species, and humanity stood at its center like a beacon of defiance against the old empires. Jake Morrison had been promoted to Admiral and commanded the Alliance fleet from a new flagship called the UES Unity. The ship was a marvel of combined technology, built with human quantum systems and alien engineering that made it faster and more powerful than anything Earth had produced before. The Unity's bridge reflected the new reality of galactic politics. Human crew members worked alongside Ithrians, Viridians, and Dravani officers. Each species brought their own strengths to the collaboration, and the mix of different perspectives made the crew stronger than any single species vessel. Jake stood at his command station and felt a quiet pride in what they had built together. Megan Porter served as his first officer now, having risen quickly through the ranks. She was one of the linked, those humans whose brains had been permanently altered by the quantum consciousness interface. She could feel the ship's systems humming in her mind even when not directly connected, sensing problems before diagnostic programs detected them. Many of the linked had chosen to continue serving in the fleet, finding that their abilities made them invaluable for coordinating complex operations. But life was not easy for those who had been changed. Dr. Lisa Chen ran support programs for the linked, helping them adjust to their new reality. Some struggled with the constant awareness of nearby quantum systems, finding it difficult to separate their thoughts from the machines around them. A few had chosen to live in isolated colonies far from advanced technology, seeking peace in simpler surroundings. Most adapted eventually, learning to filter the background noise and use their abilities constructively. The formation of the Terran Alliance had sent shockwaves through the Crethian dominion. Within months of humanity's victory, 3 vassal species launched rebellions against their Crethian overlords. The occupied worlds had watched the battle broadcasts and learned an important lesson. If primitive humans could defeat a Crethian fleet, then resistance was possible for anyone with courage and determination. Zekthar had been stripped of his command and recalled to the Crethian homeworld in disgrace. The Dominion's leadership debated endlessly about how to respond to this new threat. Some argued for an immediate massive assault to crush humanity before the Alliance grew stronger. Others counseled patience, suggesting that the Alliance would collapse on its own as different species pursued conflicting interests. In the end, the Crethians chose a middle path. They reinforced their borders and increased military production, but did not launch another invasion. The cost of the first battle had been too high, and intelligence reports suggested that humanity had indeed developed effective countermeasures against Krethian weapons. A second war would be far bloodier than the first, with no guarantee of victory. Meanwhile, humanity expanded rapidly across the stars. 30 joint research stations operated throughout Alliance space, where human scientists worked with alien colleagues on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Dr. Eric Hayes led a team studying consciousness-based computing at a facility orbiting a Viridian world. His research had produced breakthroughs that benefited every Alliance species, creating new types of artificial intelligence that combined machine precision with intuitive problem-solving. Earth itself had changed dramatically. The planet became a hub of galactic commerce and diplomacy, with alien visitors walking the streets of major cities. Children grew up learning about dozens of different species and cultures, preparing for a future where humanity was just one voice among many. Some older people struggled with the changes, uncomfortable with how quickly their world had transformed, but most embraced the new reality, excited by the opportunities that came with galactic citizenship. Admiral Kate Sullivan had retired from active military service, but remained influential as humanity's representative to the Galactic Assembly. She had spent 5 years building relationships with delegates from dozens of species, earning respect through her honesty and clear principles. She never pretended that humanity was perfect or more advanced than they really were. Instead, she focused on finding common ground and building trust through consistent actions. The old empires watched these developments with mixed feelings. The Photonic Collective had become humanity's strongest ally outside the formal alliance structure. Counselor Mirasol's species had gained enormously from access to quantum consciousness research, making advances in energy manipulation that had eluded them for centuries. They spoke often about humanity's contribution to galactic civilization, praising the newcomers for their innovative thinking. But other powers remained suspicious. The Krethian Dominion continued to view humanity as dangerous upstarts who had disrupted the natural order. They worked behind the scenes to undermine the alliance, offering trade deals and military support to species that remained neutral. Several times conflicts nearly erupted between alliance and Dominion forces, but both sides pulled back from the edge of war. Jake Morrison dealt with these tensions on a daily basis. His fleet patrolled the borders of Alliance space, showing the flag and protecting trade routes from pirates and raiders. The work was often tedious, involving long periods of quiet patrol broken by brief moments of action, but he knew the importance of maintaining a visible presence, demonstrating that the Alliance would protect its members. On one routine patrol near the Galactic Rim, the Unity sensors detected something unusual. Megan Porter studied the readings carefully, her enhanced perception picking up patterns that normal sensors missed. She reported strange energy signatures coming from deep space, beyond the mapped regions of the galaxy. The signatures were artificial, definitely created by intelligent beings, but they did not match any known species in the Assembly database. Jake ordered the Unity to investigate, taking 2 escort vessels with him. What they found sent chills through every crew member. A massive fleet was emerging from the galactic core, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation. The vessels were unlike anything in Assembly records, built with technology that made even the most advanced known species look primitive. They did not respond to communication attempts and showed no signs of slowing down. Jake immediately sent a priority alert to Earth and the Assembly Court. A new power was entering known space, and nobody knew whether they came in peace or war. The discovery reminded everyone that the galaxy was far larger and more complex than even the Assembly understood. Humanity had been so focused on their conflicts with the Krethians that they had forgotten about the vast unknown regions beyond explored space. The news reached Admiral Kate Sullivan during an assembly session, and she shared it with the delegates. The revelation changed conversations immediately. Ancient species that had been arguing about territorial disputes suddenly realized how small their concerns were. If this new force proved hostile, no single empire or alliance would be able to stand against them alone. Ambassador Vektal stood and proposed something unprecedented. He suggested that the Assembly form a unified defense force, combining ships from all member species under a single command structure. It would require setting aside old rivalries and trusting former enemies. But the alternative was facing the unknown threat divided and weak. The debate lasted for hours, with delegates from dozens of species expressing concerns and proposing modifications. The Krethian representatives initially opposed the idea, seeing it as an attempt to dilute their military power, but even they could not ignore the sensor data showing the approaching fleet. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The Unified Defense Force would be temporary, activated only during this specific crisis, with command rotating between species based on merit rather than political power. When voting came, the measure passed with overwhelming support. The Galactic Assembly had never achieved such unity before, and it had taken an external threat to make it possible. Humanity's role in bringing this about was not lost on anyone. 5 years ago, humans had been unknown primitives fighting for survival. Now they were helping to reshape galactic civilization. Jake Morrison received orders to take the Unity and join the assembly point where the unified fleet was gathering. Ships from 40 different species converged on a location between Alliance and Krethian space. He watched through the viewport as vessels of every size and design took formation, creating the largest military force ever assembled in recorded galactic history. Megan Porter worked with tactical officers from a dozen species, developing coordinated battle plans that could account for the different capabilities of each fleet. It was challenging work because every species had their own doctrine and communication protocols, but slowly they found ways to make it function. The shared threat focused everyone's minds wonderfully. On Earth, Dr. Eric Hayes and Dr. Lisa Chen worked frantically to adapt quantum consciousness technology for use by other species. Some aliens could use modified versions of the neural interface, though none achieved the same level of integration that humans managed naturally. Still, every advantage mattered when facing an unknown enemy.